Hello, can you hear? I don't know why this isn't working. Can you hear me now? I'm so sorry about this. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I was saying before, when I thought you guys could hear, that the reason why I was taking some time is because there are people in my house, so I have to be kind of quiet. And I was kind of waiting for them to go, but they're still here, so I can't really do anything about that. But thank you all for joining. So you can see on the screen what we're going to be doing in this live. So we're going to be beginning with looking at the question structure. What are the question structures and what do you have to do to answer each of them? I'm not being backward, no. And then we're going to look at a question 2. I'm going to answer it live. Then I'm going to answer 2 question 4s live. Question 1 is quite obvious, as in you just have to kind of label 4 things. And then the final one, I'm not in danger, don't worry, I'm not in danger. And then the final one, we're going to be going through a full paper live. So all of this is live. The reason why it's not pre-prepared is so that I can show you that I'm also answering questions at the same time as you. Now, for those of you asking about question 5, I did a live on question 5 on Saturday, so I can link it here quickly so you guys can watch that after. It's really good because it goes through everything that you need to include. So yeah, I will link that quickly. 1 second. Here. I recommend you guys watch or you download or you memorize my story because it's really good. Here's the link. So yeah, you can watch that video or that live after you watch this one, or you can watch it now if you want, and that goes through everything for question 5. Oh yes, so for question 3, it's very similar, so that's why we'll be going through that in the full paper live practice. Okay, does anybody have any more questions, or should we keep going through? Yeah, you're going to try and tweak it to make sure that the story fits with the image. Yeah, I'll pin the Discord link if you can just send it, and then I will. And I hope your exams were good so far as well. Okay, so let's start. There you go, I'll pin it. 1 second. I don't have a description example actually, but we might be able to do one live for those of you who want to see that. Okay, so many of you guys here. It's lovely to see you all. So starting off with quickly going through the question structure of what the paper is going to look like. Hopefully you should be familiar with this, but let's go through. So you've got 5 questions and they're organized in terms of section A and section B. So section A has questions 1 to 4 and section B has question 5. Now question 1 to 4 are all short answer questions relatively, and then question 5 is the big story or description. So you're going through the questions individually. This is for AQA, by the way, specifically for AQA. So you've got 4 marker for question 1. For your second question, you've got an 8 marker, and this is going to be a question about language. For your third question, you also have another 8 marker, but this is talking about structure. And then your question 4, you've got your statement question. Okay, so you've got those 4 questions. Now I'm just going through them. So your first one, which is just a 4 marker, that's going to be pretty obvious in how you should go about that. So it's going to be a question like, let me think of an example, list 4 ways in which the main character is feeling, and then you literally just list it. You can use quotes from the text, straight from the text. I would recommend doing section B first, but that's just my preference, because I always believe doing the highest mark questions first helps. So i.e. doing section B first and then going in normal order through these questions. But it's up to you how you do that best. It's kind of like how an RS or religious studies, whether you did the 12 markers first, if you found that better, I would recommend then doing the question 5 first. So you've got the 4 marker, which is quite obvious, as I mentioned. Your 8 marker is about language. So you want to avoid waffling here as much as possible. English language is all about having no waffle. You need as many points as you can, showing the examiner to give all of the marks. You want to have your quotes, the choice of words, and you don't want to step into the boundaries of literature. And that's what we're going to go through today, how exactly you do that. Okay, so this is just an overview of the question types. Okay, and then you have your 8 marker, which is on structure. So the structure of the text. How is the text structured to interest you? It's always the same question. To interest the reader, we'll say. And then you want to talk about kind of common things, and we'll speak about that. And then your question 4 is your statement, and you have to basically evaluate, suggesting whether you agree with the statement or disagree. You can't just have one side, you need to weigh things up. That's a key method there. Now note, a key thing they actually say in the mark scheme is that or not in the mark scheme, in the examiner's report, is that if you put an incorrect point, i.e. it's made up, for example, they can't take away any marks. So what you need to really prioritize here is it's all about jamming as many points as you can in your answer, in your response. It doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. In this case, try and make the majority right, of course, but you don't know how exactly an exam will go. So it's important to do that. Okay, for question 5, is it okay if I've memorized a sky description, for example? Yep, definitely. I do recommend only memorizing stuff for question 5, so 100%. Okay, so let's now, and then section B, which is question 5, which we have already discussed. So this is 40 marks, and it's going to be your story or your description. The picture that they can give you can either be with the story or the description. I would suggest memorizing the story that I used, because A, it's not been used. This is the first year I'm giving it out, apart from when I used it a couple of years ago. And when I used it, got 4 marks, and just adapt it to whatever prompt. It really does work. Okay, apart from that, we are going to focus on the first 4 questions. So let me make these check boxes so we can check what we're doing as we go along. So we've looked at the question structure. We're now going to look at some question 2 practice. There was this really helpful document that I had used, and it's still online. So we're going to go through loads of questions for that. We'll do a question 2 practice live. So let me just find the one that we are scheduled to do. This question 2 will be on the Great Gatsby. The reason why I'm doing all of the question practices on different texts is to get you guys ready for as many texts as possible, to open you up. Okay, perfect. Okay. So here you have it. You've got a bit of information. The maximum mark for the paper is 80, 40 marks for section A, 40 marks for section B. You're reminded of the need of good English. Look how the irony when they say good English and they use the word good to describe it. Clear presentation in your answers. You'll be assessed on the quality of your reading in section A and the quality of your writing. So it's all about the assessment objectives are mainly about inference. So inference, your ability to take things from a text, whether it's explicit, obvious, or implicit. So less obvious. You need to memorize a story that has multiple themes that you could easily adapt. So even if it is a horror story, what I recommend you do is go through all the past papers, go through the last question, and see if you can quickly just mentally adapt your story to that. Okay, we're now going to go through an actual live example. So you've got The Great Gatsby here, quite a heavy text, and we're going to be doing question 2. So question 2, you're given an extract straight away, and we're asked to look in detail at this extract from lines 1 to 18. How could the writer use language to describe the extravagance of parties? So you're given a focus and you're just asked, how is language used to describe the extravagance of parties? This is 8 marks. So let's begin by looking at this, okay? Okay. So again, as I said, you need to try and aim to include as many points as possible, and perhaps it's best to start from question 2, because look, question 2 is always from lines 1 to 18. So instead, I wouldn't recommend reading all of the extract and then starting the questions. I recommend maybe starting with question 2, because it begins from lines 1 to 18. So you're reading this and answering a question. You're knocking 2 birds with 1 stone. Yes, of course, I can send the document to you. Here you go. So yeah, we're going to do a walkthrough. So let's go. How does writer use language here to describe the extravagance of parties? So looking at some points that we can say, because I've done some basic, and don't think you have to do loads of in-depth annotations, guys. A couple of lines is perfectly fine. So what have we got here? There was music from my neighbour's house through the summer nights. You just want to skim this, okay? In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whispering and the champagne and the stars. Now, this has quite a lot to say about it. It's a simile, and then you've got repetition of the and. It's almost anaphora, so we can speak about that. Okay, so you're just skimming the text, looking for language devices you can talk about. Look for minimum 3, okay? And things that have lots of things you can say. At high tide in the afternoon, I watched his guest diving from the tower of his raft or taking the sun on the hot sand of the beach, while his 2 motorboats slit the waters on the Sound. So I'm going to highlight slit the waters on the Sound. There's no wrong and right with whatever you can highlight. If it is provocative and makes you think of things, then I would definitely recommend focusing on that. So, next, let's see. Drawing aquaplanes over cataracts of foam. On weekends, his Rolls Royce became an omnibus, wearing parties to and from the city between 9 in the morning and long past midnight, while his station wagon scampered like a brisk yellow bug. So again, we've got another simile here, so you can highlight everything, but you don't have to talk about everything. And on Mondays, 8 servants, including an extra gardener, toiled all day with mops and scrubbing brushes and hammers and garden shears. So we've got listing there, but remember that's structural, so we don't want to highlight that for this question. Every Friday, 5 crates of oranges and lemons arrived like a fruiteer in New York. Every Monday, these same oranges and lemons left his back door in a pyramid of pulpless halves. There was a machine in the kitchen which could extract the juice of 200 oranges in half an hour, if a little button was pressed 200 times by a butler's thumb. At least once a fortnight, a corps of caterers came down with several hundred feet of canvas and enough coloured lights to make a Christmas tree of Gatsby enormous garden. On buffet tables garnished with glistening. Okay, you've got alliteration there. spiced baked hams, crowded. So we've got almost personification here, crowded against salads, pastry pigs and turkeys, bewitched to a dark gold. Okay, so that's probably enough. We're now going to start answering the question. So this is from The Great Gatsby. Okay, we're going to answer this now. I hope you're finding this helpful. You'll probably start finding it a bit more helpful once we start looking at a possible response. Okay. So you want to dive straight in when you're responding. Here, let's go to question 2, practice. Okay, so question 2, response. I'll publish this document on my website so you can use this if you want to review it. So The Great Gatsby. So what is the question again? The question is, how does the writer use language to describe the extravagance of parties? Okay, I want to make this as clear as possible. So we can start by saying the writer, it's probably best to go with this in terms of chronological, so order. So we've got like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. So we're going to speak about that quote now. So the writer uses similes to convey the popularity of his parties. Nice, simple opening statement. It's not too literature-like. You're literally saying, here's what language they're using, and here's the direct effect of it. Okay, obviously we have to go more in depth now. You can say this is seen through the simile, like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. Okay, so nice embedded quote there. You don't necessarily have to plan it because, again, it's an 8 mark. It's all about bang, 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 timings being quick, 10 minutes or so, okay? Now, what is a direct effect of the simile? Well, you can say the simile evokes this sense of collective attraction towards parties alike the insects, like the moths. So talking about how moths gather together towards light, they're creating a direct parallel with the amount of how attractive it is. Now you want to then use words like furthermore. So furthermore, the progression, because we want to talk about, this is a really nice quote that we mentioned, because there's a progression. You've got going from whisperings, champagne, and stars. So these are the things surrounding by the and look at that progression. So you've got whispering, champagne, and stars. So the progression enabled by the asyndetic listing. Now, even though this isn't necessarily a language technique, that's more of a structural technique, because we're zooming in on the words, it's kind of allowed. It's very ambiguous with AQA. With Edexcel, they definitely allow it because they know that you're talking about the language, but with AQA, it's a hit and miss to talk about it. But in this case, it's important to mention it just to show the examiner your extra knowledge. Have I written progression? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Furthermore, the progression enabled by the asyndetic listing from, and then start embedding your quotes in. So from whispering to champagne to stars suggests the gradual amelioration or i.e. the improvement, the gradual improvement from things within our universe, such as nature, such as, we can say from things, we can just be obvious. So from human things to beautiful objects beyond the clasp of the universe, i.e. the stars. Perhaps reiterating the incline of extravagance, so we're using the words in the question, perhaps reiterating the incline of extravagance at parties from human simple imagery to universally awesome figurative language. Okay, so that is my first point, my first paragraph. What we've done there is we've looked at one point, we've looked at the fact that they've used similes, we've broken it down, we've mentioned two key things there, so the collective attraction and also the asyndetic listing, the gradual improvement from human things to beautiful objects, and that's our first paragraph, okay? Oh, is it syndetic listing? I'm sorry, you might be correct. Yes, it is syndetic listing. Sorry about that. Where did I write this? Well done for correcting me. Thank you. Syndetic listing. Okay, so does this paragraph make sense? Because we've got some more points to say. Because obviously you want to obviously this is a lot of analysis. You don't have to put this much analysis for each point. It's all about the volume and quantity rather than how much depth you're going in. Okay, we're now moving on to another point then, if nobody has any questions. The writer uses hyperbole or hyperbole, as you guys may have learnt. The writer uses hyperbole, I'll leave it up so you can see. The writer uses hyperbole to highlight the elegance and precision of the parties. Okay, the verb slit. The verb slit portrays. So the verb slit was used when they're talking about how the boat very much glides across the water. It's as if they very smoothly do it, and it suggests, the quality of the parties, how everything's very much, even down to the motor and mechanics of the boat, is perfect in every way. So the precision of the verb slit portrays the precision and efficiency of the boat's inner workings, and reflects how every minute aspect of the party was smooth and exact. You don't want to step into the bounds of going into context and saying, possibly talking about the actual structure, talking about the actual things that are happening in the story. You don't want to go too far into that. So just talk about how whatever you're talking about is being described and what that suggests. Okay, here is the extract for those of you guys who wanted to see that quickly. I can't split my screen because there's two different things. Oh, let me see if I can split my screen. Give me a second. Okay, I'm glad that some people are finding it really helpful. Thank you, Logan. I'm very happy that you like it. Okay, I can't find. I'm not unable to. Oh, okay. Give me a second. I will post this as well, don't you worry. But yeah, because I see that a lot of the time, no shade to everybody else who does English videos, they don't actually go through anything in live. I think there is one teacher who does, who's really nice. But apart from that, they just kind of go through prepared answers. And it's good to go through it live so you can watch me struggle as well. I think that's fair enough. Okay, continuing on. So, the writer uses hyperbole to highlight, which means exaggeration, to highlight the elegance and precision of the parties. The verb slit portrays the precision and efficiency of the boat's inner workings and reflects how every minute aspect of the party was smooth and exact. And then we can say, as usual, furthermore, auditory imagery is employed through the sibilants, and sibilants just means the alliteration of the S sound, because it says slit the waters of the sound. So you've got a lot of sound in it, and it doesn't matter if it's the beginning or end of the word because the S sound is quite prominent. So thank you guys who are appreciating. So, furthermore, auditory imagery is employed through the sibilants. And what can we say about that? We can say that this exacerbates the smoothness, which exacerbates means like make it more important, make it more important than it should be effectively. Exacerbates the smoothness through various different senses, i.e. the visual sense and the auditory sense. So that's our second paragraph. Now I'm just going to go through a couple more points that you can make because we looked at different quotes. And if in case you guys analyze different quotes, I want to make sure I'm covering as many as possible. So I'm glad that you guys are. This live will probably end late as well because at the end we're going to going through a full paper, so that's probably going to be helpful to you. This is kind of just practice to get you used to how to answer different things. So the next quote we're going to talk about, I'll try and be as fast as possible. 2 paragraphs is enough if they're in depth for an 8 marker, but I just want to go through the different points. So you can talk about here, I'll just say them verbally maybe. You've got garnished with glistening. And that is, I guess, very similar. You can talk about how the writer, I'll say this in other points. Other points you can make. The writer employs alliteration through garnished, what was it? Garnished with glistening. Garnished with glistening. this is definitely enough to get the full 8 marks, because obviously there's this does seem like not that much on the computer, but it would probably be a lot more on the page, and you don't want to go spend any more than a whole page on this. The writer employs alliteration through garnish with glistening, so you can add other points if you're not confident in your points that you've made, just to ensure that you can get as many marks as possible. But I recommend doing that after, when you go back and check. The writer employs alliteration, so garnished with glistening. You can suggest that this exemplifies the perfect execution of the culinary goods. Hope you like my language here, it's coming all from my head. Suggesting both the classy and dazzling food, possibly paralleling, if that's a word, paralleling to the party, to the extravagance of the party. Keep saying extravagance of the party. Keep using the words of the question in your response. It highlights that you're thinking about the question, especially towards the end. Okay, and another point you could have made, which I'm not going to write, where it says here, let's see. Or we'll finish there for now. So that's our 8 marker. That's our question 2 practice. I hope you found that sort of helpful as just a run through of what you want to do and what kind of words you want to use. We'll go through another one in the full live practice, but now we're going to do 2 different question 4 practices using 2 different texts. So let me just get them ready for you. Any questions, do let me know. I'll try to answer them, okay? Okay, we're now on to question 4, the goldfinch, and we are looking at a text called the goldfinch. So let me just make space on the Google Doc so we can go through this together. I'm trying to go through all of the texts on this document, hence why we're going through loads of different ones. So the goldfinch. Okay, now what is question 4 always about? So let's look at it. So just ignoring the text for a second and focusing on what the question looks like, you've always got a question that's like this. Focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from lines 18 to the end. So notice how in the previous questions, you're doing from 1 to something like 18. Now you're focusing elsewhere, so they don't want you to use those same points. Now you've got the statement. So a student having read this section said, the description is so vivid that the character of the mother really seems to come to life. So they'll give you a statement which is pretty much could be anything, and then you've got to answer, to what extent do you agree? Okay, so we're going to look at this. So what we have to do first is go and look back at the text and look at are you unable to hear? Can you not hear me? I think I am still making sound, so. The number of paragraphs that you write for each section heavily depends. For the 8 markers, if you write really big paragraphs, which are kind of like almost half a page, 2 is sufficient. And it's more about the number of points that you're putting in. So for your 8 markers, try and put in 3 points. Therefore, if you miss one, then you've got like a one to rely on. And if one of your points isn't analysed as in depth, you're supporting the examiner. Thank you guys for that. On top of that, you've got the other 8 marker, which I would suggest doing the same thing. Now, for the question 4, it's going to be based on as I said, because it's 20 marks, you want to put as many points as possible. So anywhere between 3 paragraphs if they're quite long, to maybe 5 short paragraphs if you're talking about each technique in depth. So as I said, it depends. It's not like a specific thing that you need to keep on track. We'll be going through question 3 in an example. Okay, so in the final example, it's just I'm focusing on question 4 because there's 2 20-mark practices that we'll be going through to make sure that you understand how to do that. Okay, so let's look at some things that we can say. Let's look at the text. Let's look at 18. What is it? Lines 18 till the end. So going up, and we need to focus on, i.e., the character of the mother. So where is the text here? So it might help to highlight it so you don't ever make any mistakes. So you've got 18 to the final line, and we're looking at description for the character of the mother. So let's go. She was beautiful too. Okay, so you've got the simple sentence here. Well, it's almost simple because you've got the comma and an extra clause, but this part of it is simple. That might be helpful. Any description of how we're looking at. It's a declarative, and the fact that it's she was beautiful too, so it allows you to really focus on that adjective through the the pause, the caesura there. Okay, that's almost secondary, but still she was. When she came to New York fresh from Kansas, she worked part-time as a model, though she was too uneasy in front of the camera to be very good at it. Whatever she had, it didn't translate to film. And yet, she was wholly herself, a rarity. So you can talk about the use of a colon here, because let's see, in the question, we're not limited to just speaking about language, are we? Let me just double check. No, so we can speak about anything, can't we? Write about your own impressions, evaluate. So references with the text. So you can speak about language, you can speak about form, you can speak about structure. So yeah, 100% we want to talk about grammar because that's something that students often forget. So yeah, you've got the colon and you've got a rarity. Now, colon is used to normally suggest that whatever you're going to say next is the name of something else, or it's an example of something. So she is an example of a rarity. I cannot recall ever seeing another person who really resembled her. She had black hair, fair skin that freckled in the summer, china blue eyes with a lot of light in them, and in the slant of her cheekbones there was such an eccentric mixture of the tribal and the Celtic twilight that sometimes people guessed she was Icelandic. Okay, what have we got there? Well, we've got listing. There's a suggestion that this endless amount of praise and description that you can definitely link to the student statement about how realistic the description is and evocative it is, because it's so ultra specific as well. It's not just general statements. Thank you guys for all being here as well. It's really nice to see you all chatting and watching this. Okay, let's see what else we can say now. So in fact, she was and just going back on the listing as well. So there's a progression in the listing. We start by talking about her physical features, black hair, but skin, eyes, cheekbones, and then we have this really smooth transition into her historical background, her ethnicity. So this list is used to delve in to delve almost past her physical attributes into her tribal roots, so, or perhaps tribal roots. So you can definitely link that there. Now, I'm continuing on. In fact, she was half Irish, half Cherokee, from a town in Kansas near the Oklahoma border, and she liked to make me laugh by calling herself an Okie, even though she was as glossy and nervy and stylish as a racehorse. That's a key quote we can talk about. Where is that gone? You've got triplet here, even though it's separated by the and, it's still triplet. So it's quite interesting. We can focus on that. Next, that's exotic. That exotic character unfortunately comes out a little too stark and unforgiving in photographs. So she's now being called exotic. Giving human animal features exactly, so the intertwining of that. Oh, 88 people is definitely enough. I'm still very grateful that 88 people are watching me. That's still amazing considering I'm not a teacher, just a past student. So still lovely to have you here. Her freckles covered with makeup. Her hair pulled back in a ponytail at the nape of her neck, like some nobleman. Note how this is full of loads of language techniques. So don't get overwhelmed. You don't have to mention everything, yeah? Just focus on things that provide you with lots of ideas. Thank you, Mahim. I value that. Okay. Her merry, unpredictable quality. I'm going to highlight that. Which is what I love about her the most. It's clear from the stillness she emanates in pictures how much she mistrusted the camera. She gives off a watchful, tigerish air of steeling herself against attack. So I like what somebody said about the animalistic nature. I'm going to copy them and highlight that quote there. Perched on the edge of her chair. Again, sorry to skip that. But in life, she wasn't like that. She moved with a thrilling quickness, gestures sudden and light, always perched on the edge of her chair, like some. Then you've got a simile here, like some long, elegant marsh bird about to startle and fly away. So animalistic imagery there. I'm just going to skip to this bit here. And her laugh was enough to make you want to kick over what you were doing and follow her down the street. So it's very specific. And again, we've got some auditory imagery there. So it's a bit different to what we've looked at so far. Okay, so that's looked at this in depth. We're now going to start writing our response. So I have a printed copy at my desk. That's why I keep turning the pages. So let's look at what we can say. I would say perhaps go through this chronologically because you might not have enough time to think, to group together the different quotes and say, okay, in one way she's presented this way, in one way she's presented another way. If you do it chronologically, you can still get a lot of marks. Okay, so let me show you, let's do some responding. So we can begin just generally, the writer. What's the difference between this and question 2? Well, this is a 20 marker. Question 2 was only 8 marker. And this is talking about, so I don't know if you're asking me that or Jude, but this is focused on a statement. So you have to keep responding to the statement and whether you agree with the statement, whereas the other one's just talking about language generally. Here you're pinning it to whether this statement is true or false, which is a description is so vivid that the character of the mother really seems to come to life. Yes, well done for those saying that. You do need evaluative statements. Okay, so let's go back to this page here and let us begin. So the writer, we can talk about the first bit and suggest how there was an initial focus on the physical characteristics of her. So we can say the writer begins, or the writer arguably, because remember we're debating the statement here. So no, question 4 is the first section. It's not the second section. Yeah, I think we should change Jude to Professor Jude. Question 4 is section A, not section B. Don't get confused, guys. But I guess it doesn't really matter. It's just turning pages, isn't it? Okay. The writer arguably begins his mother's description quite narrowly through emphasizing or through zoning in on solely the physical characteristics and traits of the mother. Okay, so let's say through the simple declarative, she was beautiful. And don't forget the to. Through that simple declarative, it seems to plainly limit all of his mother's charisma or character to a single arbitrary word. So arbitrary is a useful term to use, especially in English language, because you can say English language, it's quite arbitrary means it's general, it's not specific, it's unspecific, it's very like it could mean anything. So beautiful is a very arbitrary term. Food could be beautiful, your relationship can be beautiful, a person can be beautiful, you know, it's really overused. So it seems to plainly limit all of his mother's character to a single arbitrary word. Now, why are we kind of criticizing the writer? Well, remember, we've got the statement, which is suggesting that the mother is creating to a character that's so realistic. So in this case, we're starting it with the disagreeing point, which is perfectly fine. So to a single word, and thus we can say in a very unauthentic in a very unauthentic and unmemorable fashion directly. And then we can put here challenging the student's statement. So we're constantly linking back to whether we agree or disagree with the statement. Then we can say this one-dimensional perspective continues. And then we can put our little embedded quote there. Yeah, arbitrary is a synonym for vague. Well done. Okay, I hope you're finding this useful. If you have any questions, do let me know. But I might not see it, so I'll try and see. This one-dimensional perspective continues when there's another quote, which I can see. He says she is very good at it. In which the restricted adjective good coupled with it conveys this sense of vagueness and could highlight the writer's inability to pinpoint exact details about his mother. Why are we saying this statement? Because again, it's referring back to the student statement, which we're supposed to evaluate. Okay, so you can then just finish with this initial portrayal heavily contrasts the student, sorry about this spelling mistake, contrast the student's statement of a vivid description as the writer initially offers generalized virtues when discussing his mother, such as beautiful and very good. Okay, So that highlights that point there. The initial portrayal heavily contrasts the student statement of a vivid description, as the writer initially offers generalized virtues when discussing his mother, such as beautiful and very good. Okay, that's our first paragraph they're talking about at the beginning. We'll do a Kahoot later, 100%. Yes, you can say colloquial as well, but colloquial is more conversational, so I guess, yeah, you could argue that good is conversational. We will do a Kahoot today, 100%. You guys definitely deserve it. I can't believe that this is one of the last exams. You've done so well throughout this season. Yes, we are quoting words like it because we're talking about how there's vagueness. He's not being specific at all, the writer. Okay, now moving on to our next paragraph, because remember this is 20 marker, timing is tight. Okay, we can then begin the next paragraph and say, however, because obviously going back to the extract, you can see that there's a development from these quite vague descriptions to definitely much more in depth, especially through the listing. So that's why we're beginning the next paragraph with, however, we're preparing the examiner to suggest that we are willing to evaluate and weigh up both sides. So, however, this is perhaps the writer's method to exemplify contrast and development. Here we're bringing in some structural terms here. Contrast and development into much more detailed ideas explored later. I.e., the purpose that he made the initial bit so plain is so that he could highlight and exemplify the actual specific traits about his mother, so those are more memorable. So it's a method of making them interested. Okay, so however, this is perhaps the writer's method to exemplify contrast and development into much more detailed ideas explored later. And then we begin. The writer employs syndetic listing. I got it right here. Syndetic listing, when we're talking about the we'll talk about when she starts speaking into going from china blue eyes and the slant of her cheekbones. Here's the full quote, and we obviously want to avoid quoting the entire thing, but we do want to capture the fact that there is listing going on. She had black hair, fair skin. So you could shorten it, just say black hair, fair skin, that freckled in the summer, china blue eyes with light in them, and the slant of her cheekbones. Okay, and then we'll end the quote there. We don't want to make it too long. Again, it is quite long as it is. Okay, so that's our use of syndetic listing. Okay. So, the writer's function of this list is twofold. Now, it's always good to start with that if you want to tell the examiner that you're not just highlighting one bit, you're highlighting an in-depth analysis of something. So, the writer's function of this list is twofold. Initially, it delves in. No, we could say initially the use of this lengthy and continuous list perhaps delves into the overwhelm of memories that the writer associates with his mother. And secondly, I'll scroll down a little bit. So, and secondly, how the ongoing chain of occurrences, juxtaposes the earlier limited agency, which just means the fact that there's very limited definition in this case, that's what we're saying, the limited agency that the reader experienced. This on-off method of language could possibly implicitly highlight the vivacity and energetic and vibrant nature of his mother, being very excitable, going up, her emotions were up, down, up, down. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So what I'm saying is this on-off method language of going from quite limited words, she was beautiful and very good, to something that's quite detailed, possibly implicitly highlights, i.e. it's not explicit, it's implicit, it's found within the structure, highlights the vivacity and vibrant nature of his mother. And then we can say, furthermore, through the additional clauses, such as with lots of light in them, when we were speaking about the china blue eyes, this generates a more personalized and memorable attribute that ultimately supports the student statement as the reader becomes aware of the intricacies that define the mother. Okay, and we can say the surreal intricacies, so it's suggesting that it's almost coming to life, and again further perpetuating the statement and suggesting that the statement is true. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, and that's our second paragraph. So hopefully you can see the development from the initial paragraph criticizing the statement to the second paragraph supporting the statement, but we've not done it in such an obvious way that it's like a pros and cons paragraph. It's very smoothly done. Okay, and then we want to talk about the historical and cultural and ethnic aspect of the statement. So we can then say the writer, because remember this is a 20 marker, so you want a lot of in-depth points. The writer then tactfully zooms in on the historical and ethnical, is that a word? Ethnical, that's not a word, is it? Or we can just say ethnic. The historical and ethnic origins of his mother. Okay. So what quote can we use? we can say the writer then tactfully zooms in on the historical and ethnic origins of his mother, and this provides depth to his mother as the reader learns about fantastical depictions of her roots. Okay, and then the quote we're going to look at is when he says an eccentric mixture of the tribal and the Celtic. So we can say the writer distinguishes her mother or his mother's ethnic background as an eccentric mixture of the tribal and the Celtic. Which hones in on the which reminds the reader of the generational heritage passed on not just from the previous generations, but also from the mother to his son. So it reminds us that the writer has also got that heritage still in the bloodline. Now I can say, zooming in now, the adjective eccentric provokes this sense of the mother containing an eclectic personality, an eclectic charisma that is inherent from her genetics, which is an interesting trait to have, and we don't really see that when we've got character descriptions. This is fiction. So remember, paper 1 is fiction, paper 2 is non-fiction. Okay, so the mother containing an eclectic charisma that's inherent from her genetics. Okay, so hopefully you guys are getting a lot of ideas about things that you can mention, how you should go about answering your questions. So, what we can say, however, because again, we want to continuously try and evaluate. So I was just looking at the quote and it says, the mixture of the Celtic and the tribal. But then we get this kind of reality check where it says, in fact, she was half Irish, half Cherokee. And this seems to be quite, it's almost like a letdown. So we can then say, the writer, however, disappoints as the fantasy is diminished down to reality, as the mother is in fact half Irish and half Cherokee. Which hugely contrast the prior presumptions about his mother's heritage, which hugely contrast. Yeah, okay, perfect. This mixed background, nonetheless. So again, we're going back to supporting it and saying it is quite memorable because this mixed background nonetheless provides a sense that the mother is still exotic and could reflect the mixed backgrounds of society today. Supporting the statement as these traits may be felt as relatable by the reader. Okay, and the statement was all about how she was portrayed as vividly and also lifelike. So we can say that the lifelike factor, yeah, you can definitely agree with that. But again, you can see here you can go either way with your analysis. You can either agree with it or disagree with it. Okay, we're going to move on to the next point now, which is the animalistic imagery. So notice we've written so many paragraphs. We've written 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. We're now going to write our 4th paragraph. So just think 20 marker, 4 paragraphs in depth, talking about 4 different things. You'll definitely get the marks because you're hitting the quantity and you'll hit the quality if you talk about them in depth. Logan, I would do the GCSEs with you if I could as well. I'll do it with all of you. I think it'll be quite fun. I think you guys have a lot of potential. I think sometimes it's difficult to get that if you don't understand the extract, because it's probably easier to see now as I explain things, but maybe in the exam, obviously you're presented with something you've never seen before, so it's going to be much harder, of course. Okay, so we're looking at the final point now where we're talking about the animalistic imagery. So the writer employs animalistic imagery to attach the enthusiastic and lively perspirations of to that of his mother. Okay, so we're making a parallel between the animals and how they behave and linking that to how the mother behaves. So this is visible through the progression. You know, I'm going to start writing in different colors. Maybe it'll be more fun. This is visible through the progression from watchful, tigerish air to perched on an edge, ... like some elegant bird. Okay, so that's our quote there. And now we can do some analysis about this quote, and let's use another color for analysis. So let's say blue. So the progression from a fiery tiger to a chirpy bird is indicative. That's a useful phrase to put when you're using English. Is indicative means it shows. It's indicative of the appearance versus reality in that the writer was exposed to perhaps a different and more vulnerable side of his mother. Remember, you need to also keep into the idea that the writer is the mother's son, obviously, so he's going to have a more closer look and relationship with him. Okay, so we've spoken about that. What else could we say? We could suggest that the writer neatly portrays the different or the alternate angles and perspectives of his mother's persona, encapsulating, that's a useful word to note as well. And we'll probably do the Kahoot. I don't know, because this is only the first 4-marker. We still have another 4-marker, and then we have a full paper to go through. So it depends if you want to go over that or do a Kahoot. So the writer neatly portrays the alternate angle. Perspirations, I'm talking about, yeah, exactly. How like animals are on the edge. Perspirations also means effort as well. So just like all the general enthusiasm of animals. Okay, the writer neatly portrays the alternate angles and perspectives of his mother's persona, encapsulating. Encapsulating an all-round review of his mother in agreement with the student statement. Ooh. Okay, and you can have a little paragraph if you want. I would suggest actually having a paragraph because you're talking your final opinion about whether you truly agree with the statement or not. So I would suggest saying, I think you can say I believe, but let's say, despite the brash and almost lacking opening to the mother, that acted as an amplifier to paint the intricacies of the mother in a very lifelike fashion through the plethora of listing and figurative language. Okay, and that can be a good conclusion, especially if you're running out of time. You just want a quick one that will sum it up. So we're now going to I'm going to do a vote as what you guys want to do, because going back to the initial stage, we've done the question structure and revision, we've done question 2 practice, we've done the first question 4 practice. So what would you like to do now? Would you like to go through a full paper? That would kind of be a reiteration of what we've done, but through all the questions, or do you want to do a Kahoot? I should put Kahoot on here as well. Like which of the final options do you want to focus on? And if it's mixed reviews, then we'll probably do a poll. I'm surprised many of you are saying Kahoot because I don't know if there will be one for English language. I will make a poll on YouTube. I'm surprised. I thought you guys would have said go through a full paper. I'll do a poll on the community tab and I'll link it so you guys can access that. Okay, I've posted the poll. I will share the link of it in the chat so you guys can use that. There it is. Currently seems to be more people on the full paper live practice. Can we do a short Kahoot and then continue with revision? Full paper now. So let me just find the paper that we'll be doing. Give me a second. I appreciate you guys all being here as well. I can't believe there's 70 of you here. It's so nice to see you all engaging with the community and everybody your age. So we are doing sample paper 4 of this. There's loads of papers in this document, and we've gone through a lot of the texts when we've been doing the practice. So let us begin, okay? Yeah, we'll look at question 3. We'll look at all of the questions, and as I said, we'll be going through them in a specific order. So just making sure a quick revisit of key things. The marks for questions are obviously shown. The maximum mark is 80. Section A is 40 marks. Section B is 40 marks. You're reminded good English, clear presentation. You'll be assessed on the quality of your reading in section A. Again, inference and implicit and explicit information. And then your writing in section B. You're advised to spend 15 minutes reading. I do not agree with this advice. Don't spend 15 minutes just reading it. I will go through probably the most effective in terms of time management way to go through it. Okay, so I would always recommend starting, let's see, with question 5, as I said. So what we're going to do is we're also going to look at the question 5, but I'm not going to go through the whole answer because obviously the answer is the same. It's the same memorized story. But as I said, normally we would start with section B. So let's look at section B and see if we can apply the story. By the way, if you're unaware of what the story is, hopefully somebody can link the document in the chat, or it's on my website. You can scroll down, or I also have a live discussing it and things you need to do. It's about a builder, and the builder effectively gets hit by a ton of bricks. He goes into Victorian London, and he then realizes it's not Victorian London, it's hell. So it's got a lot of different themes in it. It's got time travel. It's effectively, what I did was I looked at all of the past themes, and then I said, you know what? Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a story that culminates them all together. This is not a past paper. This is a sample paper, because I realize you guys probably have done so many past papers, so it's not worth doing another one of those. This is one which it doesn't have answers to, so I can help you with that. Okay? So in this case, we've got question 5 as we start off with. In your English language, I recommend. You're entering a creative writing competition. Either write a description suggested by this picture, or, where is this? Write the opening. So specific here. They try to make it specific so you can't just memorize the story, but you can always do that. Write the opening of a story either set in the distant past or the distant future. Well, look, we can easily adapt my builder story to that. We can say that the builder is living in the future, and then, as I said, I mentioned time travel. As I said, it's a common theme, it came up. So then you can then say the time travel, he's going into the distant past. So it actually uses both of what's in their suggestion. Therefore, that's the simple adaptation you can make. Okay? Yes, I would recommend, as we go through this paper, write down your answers. Obviously, for the question 5, we're just we're just talking about it. However, generally speaking, yes, make notes, okay? As we're going through the answers, and see what kind of answers you would have put as well. If it helps you to pause it, you can do that as well, and then we can look at what answers we want to put. So yeah, that's what I would say. Do this question first. It would take a lot less longer than 40 minutes because it's a memorized story. You should know it. And if you're doing the description, then maybe pause it and see what kind of description you can do by this picture. Obviously, it's your creativity is the limit there. And somebody's mentioned their description about the sky. Look, you can talk about the sky here. Okay, so now we're going to actually go back to section A, because imagine we've just done our question 5. Our next step is to start answering these questions. So normally what I would say is have a look at the question sheet, and on the question sheet, check. Okay, there's a checking point here. You need to check whether question 2 begins from line 1. If question 2 begins and it's like line 1 to 23, then start with question 2, because it's starting from the beginning, yeah? You're focusing on the beginning of the extract, so you're understanding it. And therefore, instead of just reading it passively, you're reading it, you're making it, you're highlighting and annotating, it's worth it. However, in this case, it's the rare case where it doesn't start from lines 1, so we'll start with question 1 instead. Hopefully that makes sense why we're doing that. So let's now look at question 1. You can memorize stories because you can simply adapt it. I got 4 marks in English language, so I would recommend memorizing it. You can't write a really good story in a short amount of time unless you have a lot of practice. So I would recommend it actually. But well done for people who are taking other sides. It's quite useful. Okay, so in this we've got question 1. So obviously, this was the way I was doing it, but it's up to you if you want to just start from question 1 and go normally. Yeah. So, read again the first part of the source from lines 1 to 7. List 4 things from this part of the text about the girl. So, let's go scroll up to lines 1 to 7. 4 things about the girl. So, let us have a look. I'm going to just look at my physical copy in front of me. So we've got the naked child ran out of the hide-covered lane towards the rocky beach at the bend in the small river. It didn't occur to her to look back. Nothing in her experience ever gave her reason to doubt the shelter. So literally any fact or piece of information you can put. So nothing ever gave her experience. She was naked. She splashed into the river. She felt the rocks and sand shift under her feet. That's one point you can make. You can either directly use the quote or paraphrase them if it makes more sense to do that. She dived in the cold water. She came up spluttering. She reached out with shore strokes for the steep opposite bank. She had learned to swim before she learned to walk. And at 5, she was at ease in the water. Those are two separate points there. Swimming was often the only way. This is not about the girl. And lines 1 to 7, so those are the key points we can make. So going through how we can actually phrase this in our answer, that will get us those marks. So you can pretty much just start off by literally reiterating the quotes. So let's write this. Full paper, sample 4. And I'll make this slightly smaller and make it black. So we've got question 1. Question 1. So we can put this in bullet points because there's only 4 things we have to list. So the first thing we can say is nothing in her experience. You can answer in this in the chat if you want to as well. I'm not sure. I think this should benefit you for EduQuest, but this is more specific for AQA. So, nothing in her experience ever gave her reason to doubt the shelter. That's one thing about her. Another thing is she splashed into the river. Another thing you could say is she could feel the rocks and sand shifting beneath her feet. And another thing you could say is she had learned to swim before she could walk, sorry. So that is testing your AO1 skills. AO1 is about being able to read some explicit piece of information and gather that. Okay, we're now moving on to question 2, which is the focus on language. You're given an extract. It's an 8 marker on language. So going to this. Nicely, they've given you the extract so you can simply just annotate anything you want. So look in detail at the extract from lines 22 to 33. And what are we looking for? Always read what you're looking for first. How does the writer use language to describe the girl's reaction to the earthquake? So let's see what we can put here. The girl started at the sound of the falling tree. Her stomach churned and tightened into a knot as fear brushed the edge of her mind. That's quite figurative. We can talk about that. You've got loads of verbs there as well, like churned and tightened, which we can focus on, suggesting her fear. She tried to stand up but fell back, unbalanced by the sickening swaying. She tried again, managed to pull herself up, and stood unsteadily, afraid to take a step. As she started towards the hide-covered shelter set back from the stream, she felt a low rumble rise to a terrifying roar. So you've got the contrast between the low rumble and terrifying roar. A sour stench of wetness and rot issued from a crack opening in the ground, like the reek of morning breath from a yawning earth. So you've got a really nice simile there, which also embeds personification, which we can talk about. But remember, we're focusing on the girl's reaction to the earthquake. So we want to keep that in mind. And therefore, when we see she stared uncomprehendingly, and also the fact that she stared as well, which is an interesting reaction. So it suggests that she's quite confused, she's bewildered. And then let's read on. So at the dirt and rock and small trees falling into the widened gap as the cooled shell of the molten planet cracked in the convulsion. The lean-to perched on the far edge of the abyss tilted as half the solid ground beneath it pulled away. The slender ridgepole teetered undecidingly, then collapsed and disappeared into the deep hole, taking its hide cover and all of it all it contained with it. The girl trembled in wide-eyed horror as a foul-breathed, gaping maw swallowed everything that had given meaning and security to the 5 short years of her life. Okay, so we've gone through things, we've highlighted things, we're now going to write a response to this. Okay, so looking at what we can possibly say now. Remember, it's an 8 marker, so 2 paragraphs is more than sufficient. You can go and do the 3 paragraphs if you have enough time. It's not letting me type on the document. Okay, it is now. So what we can say, I'm making it small so I can write as much as I can. So always begin the writer, and then again, we're focusing on language and we're focusing on the girl's reaction. So the writer, we can say initially employs employs verbs and figurative language, or we can just say figurative language in general, to convey a fearful and frightening response from the girl to the earthquake, directly answering the question here. And then we wanted to say what is our evidence? Well, I'll start writing in different colors so it's easier to see. So evidence can be read. So the use of the verbs or the use of the verbs in the declarative or the assertive, however you want to call it. Her stomach churned and tightened are evocative of nervousness and, or we can just say evocative of nervousness and absolute fear. Okay, now we're going to embed our second point to further strengthen the argument. We can say furthermore, the verb tightened. So we're doing a zoom here. So let's change this to pink. So furthermore, the verb tightened possibly shows how she is almost frozen and fixed and transfixed in fear. Okay, and then we want to begin our second point, but it's in the same paragraph. Personification is also utilized to characterize fear, where it says fear brushed at the edge of her mind. Okay, so this is another application kind of point here, so that's red. Okay, so personification is also utilized to characterize her fear brushed at the edge of her mind. Okay, and then we want to do some zoom in on this quote. So let's use pink. So the verb brushed, possibly conveys this sense of the stealthiness of the fear that tickles and taunts the young innocent girl. Okay, and highlights possibly how it is in fact the unpredictability of the fear that makes, that heightens the tension. So here, that's a really interesting mark, because you're going further, you're making your own observations. So that is a top level grade 9 sort of phrase that you want to mention in your response. Okay, so that is the first paragraph. Hopefully that explains that. Now we want to go on to our second paragraph. So going back to the annotated document, we spoke about her stomach churned, that simile there. The next one we're going to talk about is the kind of the contrast between the low rumble to a terrifying roar. Okay, that's our next point. Now, as I said, 2 paragraphs would be sufficient, but you can go the extra mile and do another one just to ensure that you get those marks. So it's up to you how you want to deal with that. Make the screen a bit smaller so you can see. So, our next point, we can say the writer employs vivid and sudden contrast in language and tone to replicate the girl's bewildered and confused, and we can say frantic state, because, you know, changing from one extreme to the next, it kind of mirrors how the girl is she's thinking of so many things at such a young age. Now I can say our evidence for this. The writer's use of oxymoronic contrast in, because it's not exactly oxymoronic, because it's not the contrast between the same phrase, but it's between 2 different phrases. So in a low rumble to a terrifying roar, and there's also personification in that. So we can then say this we can say, what can we say? This reflects the rapid and rising tension that further contributes to the unpredictability, as we were mentioning in our previous statement there. So we've got our red quote and then our pink analysis. Okay, and then we can also speak about how rumble and roar there's use of alliteration there. So the alliterative, sorry about that. The alliterative rumble and roar, we can speak about how that rhythmically jumps between the rapid growth of the auditory imagery from quiet to loud and aggressive, we can say. Okay, so that's another form of zoom, because we're going into the language there. So you can pick something out and talk about the different aspects of it as well. Okay. I did link the paper. Oh. Let me link the paper for you guys if you want to have a go at it as well. I think that's a good idea. I did try to, but it wasn't working previously. But let me try and get it. One sec. How do I find it again? Give me a second, guys. I'm just going to find the document that it was on. Here. Okay. It was just some random document that I found that I used, and it's sample paper 4. So tell me if you can use, if that works. Okay, we're going to continue now. So the writer employs vivid and sudden contrast in language and tone to replicate the girl's bewildered and frantic state. The writer's use of oxymoronic contrast in a low rumble to a terrifying roar reflects the rapid and rising tension that further contributes to the unpredictability. The alliterative rumble and roar rhythmically jumps between the rapid growth of the auditory imagery from quiet to loud and aggressive. And then we can link it to a more developed point, which is that in orange, this conveys the frantic escalation of, or the frantic girl's response to the escalation of the event. Okay, linking it back to the point we've made. Now, this next point is still part of the paragraph. So, the next point that we've made that kind of adds to that is the simile, like the reek of a morning breath from a yawning earth. Oh, sorry about that. From a yawning earth. So this is an interesting one as well. And we've gone straight into talking about the quote, so there's no point there. And there's no point needed because we had the initial opening point for the paragraph. So the simile, like the reek of a morning breath from a yawning earth, embeds the personification of the earth to portray this event as almost human and thus evil and monstrous. And we can also speak about the tone of it, the assertive tone, or we can say the assertive implications, because that's the sentence creates implications that's very assertively said, severely contrasts the following sentence, contrasts the neighboring sentence which is, she stared uncomprehendingly. Okay? She stared uncomprehendingly, in which the adverb, here we're doing zoom, in which the adverb uncomprehendingly provides this sense of confusion, bewilderment, and the verb stared highlights her fixation of her confused fixation on the phenomena, on the natural event. Okay? Yes, you can say, so assertive is another sentence name, just how you can call a sentence declarative. It's very similar. So it's a good technique to embed more language techniques. So here you can see that for our question 2, we've got 2 strong paragraphs. Now, I did have another idea of what we can put for another one, but it's not necessarily required. So I'm going to just put it in, let's see, green. So extra, because obviously, if I was writing this in exam time, it would be much more quicker because I'm struggling to type a little bit. And therefore, during that time, I think I would have enough time to just quickly fit in another sentence where I can say that there is intrepid horror and spine-tingling fear from the girl through the use of the verb trembled in wide-eyed horror. Which seems to exacerbate the girl's innocence. So we can say in which the adjective wide-eyed seems to exacerbate the girl's innocence and thus create this steep and exaggerated contrast between the fearsome events and the poor little girl, I can say. Okay, so that is an extra point that you can make, and you can further lengthen that if you were thinking of points along that side. Intrepid means sort of like within something. So you could say in the No More for GCSE live stream, there's an intrepid sense of community. Like that's probably not the best way to explain it. Let me see the actual definition. Intrepid, fearless, adventurous, comical. But yeah, hopefully that doesn't confuse you too much. Yeah, it's supposed to mean brave, actually. That doesn't make sense, does it? I think that word is supposed to be something else. What should I say? There is ingrained, more like that's a better word for it. There's ingrained, but intrepid is useful for this scenario because we're talking about how she's being, you can talk about how she's being brave through the situations that she's put in. Okay. So that is the question 2 done. I'll make this document available later. So we're now going to go over question 3, which is the structure question that we haven't actually looked at yet. So where is this? You now need to think about the whole source. This extract is from the opening of the novel. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? This is literally word for word the same question every year, for AQA at least. So it shouldn't be, but then obviously you have to talk about the structure of the whole thing, so it can be slightly difficult. So question 3, let us move on to that. So we're looking at structure. How has the entire text been structured? now. Okay. Here's the extract. So what can we say about the structure? Let's go back to the beginning. I hope you guys are finding this resource helpful. Okay. So we want to talk about the structure in the whole thing. So we have to really kind of overview, and this is now the first time we're actually reading the whole thing all together. So it's quite useful to go over that. Now we've already read the beginning, as you can see, and we have read from lines. What were we reading before? Lines 23 to 33 we've already looked at. So those we've looked at, the top we've looked at, so it's just a case of reading and understanding the middle bit, and then we can talk about the structure. So the girl played for a while, swimming back and forth, then let the current float her downstream, where the river widened and bubbled over rocks. She stood up and waded to shore, then walked back to the beach and began sorting pebbles. She had just put a stone on top of a pile of especially pretty ones when the earth began to tremble. The child looked with surprise as a stone rolled down of its own accord, and stared in wonder at the small pyramid of pebbles shaking and levelling themselves. Only then did she become aware she was shaking too, but she was still more confused than apprehensive. She glanced around, trying to understand why her universe had altered in some inexplicable way. The earth was not supposed to move. The small river, which moments before had flowed smoothly, was rolling with choppy waves that splashed over its banks as the rocking steambed moved at cross purposes to the current, dredging mud up from the bottom. Brush close by the upstream bank quivered, animated by unseen movements at the roots and downstream. Boulders bobbed in unaccustomed agitation. Beyond them, stately conifers of the forest into which the stream flowed lurched grotesquely. A giant pine near the bank, its roots exposed, and their hold weakened by the spring run-off, leaned towards the opposite shore. With a crack, it gave way and crashed to the ground, bridging the turbid watercourse, and lay shaking on the unsteady earth. Then we read all of the ending. So we've got this idea of this is actually quite easy to see the structure, or initially I'm finding it slightly easy to. So what we can see here is at the beginning, we've got the sense of false confidence. Nothing in her experience ever gave her reason to doubt the shelter. So this sense of overconfidence and, perhaps dramatic or situational irony. The children are overconfident, and yeah, that's what we want to talk about in the beginning. The exposition, the opening, whatever you would like to call it. And then what have we got? So towards the center, you've got the actual notice how it takes 3 separate paragraphs. We're talking about structure here. The gradual it's almost like she's slowly gaining consciousness to the fact that there is something going on that's the earth is doing. So the gradual awakening, you could say, the gradual awakening to the earthquake. Just as the earthquake begins off quite slowly and timidly, so is her knowledge of it, and then it becomes much more tense. And then you get to the end where she seems to be in a state of confusion and a state of fear. She is literally frozen, unable to move and unable to, take in any of the situation. So you always want to start by looking at the overall kind of idea, and then you look more specific. Then you look more specifically at the structural devices that have been used to help the entire text be structured to be interesting. So the fact that it takes 3 paragraphs, it's very slow, it's very gradual. Now we can start speaking about the individual parts of this. So what can we see here? Stared in wonder at the small pyramid of pebbles shaking and leveling themselves. Remember, we're looking for structural points here to highlight i.e. how the text is structured. So what else can we say? She glanced around, trying to understand why her universe had altered in some inexplicable way. The earth was not supposed to move. So you can talk about the very changing sentence structures. So up till that point, let's talk about the sentence lengths. The sentence lengths were very long. So we moved from this compound sentence length, very long, to towards the end of this paragraph, simple sentences. So this that's a structural point there. That there is the sentence lengths evolve from compound ones to simple. And what does that suggest about, like, what can we gain from that? Well, compound, very lengthy, highlighting the perks of everything, how everything is perfect, nothing is wrong. And then the simple sentences, they help to deliver the tension, they help to have these short cutting remarks that highlight the real delusion of the situation, specifically in the 5-year-old's mind, where she doesn't really understand what's going on there. Okay, so you've got this transition going on here with the sentence lengths. That's one structural point you can say, and I would always recommend doing that because there's always some sort of that. Now, there's another structural point that they always have in the texts. I'm telling you, they always have it, are lists. So there will definitely be lists somewhere, and we can see a list. 1, 2. Okay, that's 3, so it's not a list, it's a triplet there. But again, that's a structural technique you can discuss. Okay, we've got a list there, so let's highlight that here. So that list is highlighting, normally lists can highlight multiple things. So if you're listing something that's talking about something being quite overwhelming, it's something slowly getting larger and larger, perhaps it's a barrier that's getting bigger and bigger, the tension is getting, so it's kind of the list intensifying highlights the situation of the actual plot intensifying. So we can speak about the listing, we can speak about the sentence structure, and yeah, those are the 2 main paragraphs we can discuss. So hopefully I've tried to explain it in as detailed as I can, because I know some people were struggling with how to answer question 3. We're now going to actually write the response and kind of put our ideas to the page. Okay. So let's go through this. Starting all of our paragraphs like this within the within the extract, or we can say within the opening, as we were told that the writer has clearly appointed the opening section, the exposition. I would recommend saying that. Exposition just means opening, normally of plays, but you can also talk about it in terms of story. And exposition is always supposed to be quite harmonious. Everything is perfect, and then you've got the rising action with where trouble starts to get brewed. So, clearly appointed the opening section, the exposition, to portray what can we say here? To portray the harmonious and we can talk about harmonious and almost perfect setting. Almost perfect natural order. That's how it begins. Everything is perfect. There's nothing naturally confusing that's arisen or arose. Okay, so we can say now in terms of techniques. Now, I've got a good technique which I've spotted, and it's a structural technique, and it's called anastrophe. So I'm going to explain it to you. So anastrophe effectively means, and I spoke about this in French as well, it's effectively when you switch the order of a sentence. I think I called it something else then when I was speaking about it, but anastrophe is the literature term. So instead of saying, I'm going to go and do a live stream today, I will say, doing a live stream today, that is what I'm going to do. Like switching the order of sentences. So I'm going to highlight. The writer employs anastrophe to convey the confidence and security felt by the children. This can be seen through we can do a question 5 at the end for those of you who want to go through it. But yeah, I mean, it's literally going to be exactly word for word the story that I mentioned. But yes. Thank you. I'm glad that you find this live helpful. And thank you guys for all being here. Not many people have left the live, which is really nice to see. I'm glad you guys are here. I hope you're enjoying it or at least learning something from it. And make sure to take notes as well. So the writer employs anastrophe to convey the confidence and security felt by the children. This can be seen through the declarative, where it says, oh, do you guys want a break? We can do a break if you want. Nothing in her experience ever gave her the reason to doubt the shelter. Now, normally the most normal way of saying that is she never doubted the shelter because nothing happened that would lead to that. That's like the more comfortable way of saying it. So we can say in our focus points, the declarative aligns with aligned. You can't say aligns? No, we can't say align. Okay, so the declarative will say parallels. I spoke about what anastrophe is. I mentioned it. It just means the switched order of sentences. But if you want a detailed explanation, I literally just said it. Just go back a few seconds. So the declarative parallels with this sense of assertiveness. And we'll say with this sense of explicit, kind of like saying it's over the top. No one starts a story and says nothing, or no one starts a conversation and says nothing in my life ever suggests that there will be an earthquake in Britain. And then like 2 minutes later, there's an earthquake in Britain. No one really says that. So the declarative parallels with the sense of explicit assertiveness to exacerbate almost hyperbolically, still spelt it wrong, which means just exaggeratively. So to highlight, to suggest almost exaggeratively the sheer level of the earthquake, or the sheer magnitude of the earthquake occurring. Okay. And we can say, how does it exacerbate the almost hyperbolic sheer magnitude of the earthquake occurring? Well, it happens through the contrast to the later insecurity when she is, what is the word that they use? They suggest that she is unbalanced. That's it, unbalanced. And that just highlights the change, the massive change that's occurred there. And any form of contrast is always a structural technique. Okay. Now, moving on. So, what can we say now? We can zoom in on unbalanced. So the verb, no, it is unbalanced. That's an adjective. The adjective unbalanced epitomizes, that's another good way of not saying shows. The adjective unbalanced epitomizes, it epitomizes the direct contrast, obviously, of what's happened. Epitomizes the extent to which the natural event has uprooted all sorts of panic. Yeah, all sorts of panic. Now I think we're just waffling here, so we need to, let's move on to another point, another structural point, because what have we spoken about so far? Anastrophe, declaratives, we've spoken about contrast. So you can also argue that that's perhaps juxtaposition as well. Okay, so moving on to the second paragraph for this structural question. I know this is taking a lot longer than it should, but it's going to have to be quicker than this because you're going to probably have like 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes at most. Okay, now we can talk about how earlier in the extract, or we can speak about the sentence length, so the changing sentence lengths. So as the extract progresses, the writer evolves from using compound sentence structures to, or you can say complex, it's up to you, to simple sentences. Yeah, that's our statement. And then we can say this can be seen through the contrast of the, well, we can actually look at the line number and say the line numbers of the sentences. Look at this. This sentence ranges 3 lines from 4 to 6. So compared to the simple sentence, the Earth wasn't supposed to move? Is it the Earth wasn't supposed to move? Yeah, the Earth was not supposed to move. This stark difference pronounces the huge change or the huge shift in tension and also in perspective as there is now greater focus on survival rather than details about the atmosphere and the ambience. And also in perspective, as there is now greater focus on survival rather than details about the ambience, hence the sentences parallel the paramount change in inflicted by the earthquake. Okay, so that's just another quick paragraph that you can mention, talk about the sentence lengths. You can also talk about how grammar is used and how that differs. So with the listing, as we mentioned, and this listing actually links to the point we just made, because the listing contrasts to the very simple sentence, and that contrast really highlights the movement there. The long list compared to the very short sentence, that highlights the level of the situation, the magnitude of the earthquake that you're experiencing. You can refer to lines. Okay, we're now moving on to the question 4, which is the last question that we'll be doing. So it's a 20 marker. Focus this part of your answer on this first part of the source from lines 1 to 22. A student, having read this section of the text, said, "The writer makes the earthquake seem truly terrifying. To what extent do you agree?" Now, mostly these phrases are quite easy to agree with. And therefore, that's why they're testing you, because they also want you to mention some evaluative points suggesting that it's not all worth agreeing for as well. So we've actually annotated the entire text already, so I'm just going to go straight into it, and I don't want to use any more of your time. So let's answer this last question. Okay. So question 4. So remember, the statement is focused on the writer making the earthquake seem truly terrifying. So we can begin. Well, obviously, initially, there's the harmony, there's the exposition suggests that everything is all good and there's nothing wrong. So we can say, initially, arguably, because we're opening to suggestion, the writer downplays the severity of the telltale earthquake signs via the unaware focalizer character of the 5-year-old. Okay, so we're suggesting that initially everything seems to be fine because of how blissfully unaware the young child is. Now, focalizer just means the character who we see everything happening in, but it's not necessarily a first person account. So it's important to mention that. Okay, so initially, arguably, the writer downplays the severity of the telltale earthquake signs by the unaware focalizer character of the 5-year-old. Now, how do we support this? Well, let's begin. So we can say the writer's progression of, we can speak about verbs and how they changed over time. So of verbs earlier or early in the extract, very gradually builds tension from splashing and this is all quotation and evidence, so it's red. So from splashing, connoting having fun and happiness, and also youth as well, to a more serious diving. And diving could possibly be used as situational irony because later on people might be diving for their lives or trying to escape very, very rapidly. So diving, which is evocative of experience, agility, and perhaps it's just generally more serious and less concerned with fun, to then spluttering. So we're talking about the gradual movement of the verbs from splashing to diving to spluttering. So you can see the gradual shift there, and it's a more implicit way, which means less obvious way of how this rising tension is being built upon. Okay. This live is going to finish soon because we're on the last question, just on this last 20 mark. Evocative means it evokes emotions or it evokes different ideas. Don't worry, I'm glad that people are chatting as long as it's about English language. But yeah, continuing on. Okay. So we're talking about the verb. So, and the less concerned with fun to the then spluttering. Now, spluttering juxtaposes the earlier confidence, or we can say overconfidence, that the focalizer was filled with, that nothing had ever gone wrong. The question 5 should probably be about anywhere from 1.5 page, depending on your handwriting, to more than that, to 2 pages. But obviously it's difficult to say exactly. So it juxtaposes the earlier confidence that the focalizer was filled with when nothing had ever gone wrong, and through this oxymoronic language, the reader is implicitly able to infer the inconsistencies of an expert struggling to swim, i.e., we're secretly told that an expert is struggling to swim, and this is ringing alarm bells for maybe adults or people who are more observant of the telltale signs. And the fact that she's struggling to do it is more indicative of the wider idea that there is an earthquake happening. So, as if she is, oh no, and the fact that she is blissfully unaware of the happenings only further perpetuates the rising tensions. Okay. Now, that last bit there is going to be high level. The fact that you've noticed that inconsistencies and stuff like that, that's a grade 9 part of things. So you can talk about the analysis, and that's grade 8, but it's a grade 9 where you're going that step further and talking about what can the reader then infer from that piece of information, from that quote, from that structure, from that language. Okay. So we can then have our conclusive statement there. Our conclusive statement, remember, linking it back to the original statement, which is that the writer makes the earthquake seem truly terrifying. So by undermining the earthquake and its signals and its implicit signals early in the extract, it belittles and makes these incongruent details less or forgettable. By undermining the earthquake and its implicit signals early in the extract, it belittles and makes these incongruent details forgettable, so that the reader holds the same ignorance as a child, because they're both ignorant. We're both ignorant of what is to come. Perhaps initially you didn't think that earthquake was going to happen, apart from maybe the dramatic irony that caused that. Okay, we're going to move on to our second paragraph now. We're probably going to finish this live at 9:30 for those who are asking. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. The writer, we can say how initially she's not scared and fearful immediately after. There's a sense of her being curious. She's described as being in awe rather than being scared. And it explicitly says that later on as well. So what we can say is the writer then manipulates the awe and wonder of the children to highlight or to heighten the unbeknownst to them, violent dangers awaiting them. So what can we discuss now? We can say, or our quotation evidence in red, of course. So the children stared in wonder, and the noun wonder infantilizes and perhaps lessens the truly dangerous symbolism behind these hints of the disaster. No, we are on British spelling actually. It's better to do probably, because one page is very different to 3 to 4 pages. One page of quality work is much better, I would say. But at the same time, you want to have cumulative evidence. So if you mean by quality work to have a lot of points in them, then that's good. But then you want to have loads of points. So I think you need the middle point between that. You can't just have 1 point, 1 page. I think maybe 1.5 page to 2 pages. Okay. So moving on. She is then described to be still more confused than apprehensive. Question 5 has been done in a previous live on Saturday. You should be able to find it where all my lives are at, and it goes through everything you need. This is for questions 1 to 4 only. She's then described to be still more confused than apprehensive. Which the reader later identifies as an unexperienced but collateral mistake, because there's a lot of issues that could come with that, lots of danger. Okay. The verb, we can then zoom in, the verb confused prioritizes the mistake prioritizes emotions of intrigue and curiosity and mystery as opposed to fear. And then we can just put our grade 9 point, which is the writer puppeteers their lack of knowledge and ignorance to the risk in order to replicate this sense of tranquility before a storm. If you've ever heard of that phrase where everything is calm before a storm happens, it's that sense of the writer really imagining those things and really making them come to life with this. And then we can say, hence, through the so now we're responding to the statement, through the focalizer, the earthquake is viewed through a lens of keen interest and curiosity, as opposed to the more appropriate terror. Okay. So since this is a 20 marker, obviously 2 paragraphs isn't enough. So coming up with our final paragraph now, and then we'll be done. So 5 more minutes. Let's get this done. So we can talk about how the movement of the earth and how that's really described and personified as like animalistic, how the movement of the earth and the fact that it's personified with human feelings and emotions like it's evil, that is what creates this sense of terror, and it's really fearsome. So let's make that point now. So we can say the writer employs, or the writer employs figurative language when describing the mobility of the abiotic natural factors, i.e. the trees, the earth, everything like that, to accelerate this sense of impeding danger or impending danger. Okay. Now, obviously, you want to support this with quotes. So we're going to say, the smoothly flowing river transforms into one that is rolling with choppy waves. So you can do that technique of using a sentence to link together quotes, which are all across the text to highlight the contrast. This progression on a wider scale enables a more explicit exhibition of the upcoming doom. And danger that's found there. And then we're going to use another quote. So another piece of evidence. The personification of the banks quivering of the banks that had quivered characterizes even nature to be aware and frightened of the event. Which obviously contrasts the ignorant children who have no idea about what's going to happen. And then we can say, furthermore, the banks are characterized as animated. And we can speak about that in terms of, well, the fact that the banks are animated, that's unnatural. And we can talk about how the series of events is unnatural. So, which parallels with, alongside the idea that the sequence of events are also unnatural. And okay, sorry, I'm continuing on, which parallels alongside the idea that the sequence of events are also unnatural. Okay. The notion of even the inanimate objects being or experiencing whimpering fear communicates the sheer magnitude and destruction or destruction inducing event. Okay. And then you can just give a little statement which suggests that it agrees with the overall student's idea. So that is our answer. And we finished right on time. Okay. Final tips for question 5. Watch the question 5 live stream, guys. I did it and not many people were there, so I would recommend you go back and watch that. But yeah, I'll make this document available. Give me a second. Oh, you've seen it. Okay. Download. Final tips for question 5. I mean, do it first, I would say. Try and remember to keep in mind that you're trying to alter the story, whether you've memorized it or used mine, to whatever you're trying to fit. If you're using the description, then I have less experience with that. Maybe, I don't know, I don't have too many tips for the description-based task, but in terms of the story, yeah, make sure that you're molding it to what the question asks you. Also, write the plan just before you write it, so it seems like you've actually thought of the idea in the exam and you haven't pre-memorized it. Okay. So I'll make the document available and then you guys can access it from my website. But we managed to do everything. So apart from that question 4 second practice, but I think we went through a lot of practices. So that should be good for you guys. If you're struggling to think of an idea which fits everything, you can just use my story if you want. Not many people have seen it, so it's not like it's going to come up in the exam. And think of the amount of people that use everything English's story idea, and yet nobody gets told off for that. So you should be fine if you use mine and have no idea what else to put. I'm just making this all the same font. Is it a good thing if you have 25% extra time and a reader? Because my teacher told me this info, is it a good thing or bad thing? I don't understand what you mean by 25% extra time. Or do you specifically have 25% extra time? Yeah, this was a long live. Okay, I'm gonna end the live because I'm tired. But yeah, I think you guys are also, so you should probably go to sleep. Have a nice sleep. Tell me how the exam goes. Thank you so much for watching all the way till the end, some people, and I will see you later. Tell me how it goes. Goodbye.